method is it can be divided into laboratory experiments and field experiments. Two kinds. So laboratory experiments are conducted in a lab. It's kind of like a simulation. And it is highly controlled environment. So it is very specialized. But while field experiments are conducted out in the world. Yeah, these are the difference between the two different experiments. The extent to which laboratory experiments can be controlled is their main advantage. The advantage of field experiment is that they are more realistic. It is very easy. So, psychologists prefer method of research is the experiment because only through a carefully controlled experiment can one show a causal relations. An experiment allows us next case, researcher to manipulate the independent variable, and it can control for the confounding variables. It is good advantage. And whereas a confounding variables is any difference between the experimental and control conditions, except for the independent variable. They might affect the dependent variable. So, in previous lesson, we've learned the dependent variable and independent variable. So maybe you will learn about and you will know about the meaning of these two terminology. So in order to show that the violent television program caused participants aggression, I need to rule out any other possible cause. An experiment can achieve this goal by randomly assigning participants to conditions and by using various methods of control to eliminate confounding variables. This is how to study about psychology, simply explaining. And nextly, assignment is the process by which participants are put into a group, experimental or control. So, for example, there is a random assignment. It means that each participant has an equal chance of being placed into any group. Equal chance. The benefit of random assignment is that it limits the effect of participants' relevant confounding variables. This is the benefit. If participants were given the opportunity to choose whether to be in the group watching the violent television or not, it is highly unlikely that the two groups would be comprised of similar people. Perhaps violent people prefer violent television and would therefore select the experimental group. Even if one were to assign people to groups based on a seemingly random criterion, for example, when they arrive at the experiment or where they were sitting in the room, one might open the door to confining variables. Using random assignment diminishes the chance the participants in the two groups differ in any meaningful way. Or, in other words, it controls per participant relevant variables. So up to now, do you understand what it means?
Yeah.
Okay, and then later, note that when we talk about differences between groups, we are referring to the group average. For example, a single very aggressive subject will not throw off the result of the entire group. The idea behind random assignment is that, in general, the groups will be equivalent. If one wanted to ensure that the experimental and control groups were equivalent on some criteria, for example, sex, IQ scores, age, one could use group matching. If one wanted to group match per sex, one would first divide the sample into males and females and then randomly assign half of each group to each condition. Group matching would not result in the same number of males and females within each group. Rather, half of the males and half of the females would be in each of the groups. And situation-relevant confounding variables can also affect an experiment. For the participant to be equivalent is not enough. The situations into which the different groups are put must also be equivalent, except for the differences produced by the independent variable. If the experimental group watches violent television in a large lecture hall, while the control group watches other programs in a small classroom, their situations are not equivalent. Therefore, any differences found between the groups may possibly be due not to the independent variable, as hypothesized, but rather to the confounding variables. And other situation-relevant variables include the time of the day, the weather, and the presence of other people in the group, making the environment into which the two groups are placed as similar as possible controls per situation-relevant confounding variables. And nextly, there are experiment bias. It is a special kind of situation-relevant confounding variable. Experiment bias is the unconscious tendency for researchers to treat members of the experimenter and control groups differently to increase the chance of confirming their hypothesis. So note that experimental bias is not a consensus act. It is not a conscious act. So, if researchers purposely distort their data, it is called fraud, not experiment bias. Experimental bias can be eliminated by the blind procedure. Then what is double blind? Double blind, it occurs when neither the participant nor the researchers are able to affect the outcome of the research. So, a double blind can be accomplished in a number of ways. The most common way is for the researcher to have someone blind to the participant's condition interact with the participant. Whereas a single blind, it can occur when only one participant do not know to which group they have been assigned. So this strategy minimizes the effects of demand characteristics as well as certain kinds of response or participants bias. So demand characteristics are cues about the purpose of the study. Participants use such cues to try to respond appropriately. Response or subject bias is the tendency per subject to behave in certain ways. For example, circle the midpoint on a scale or pick the right-hand option more than the left-hand one. One kind of response bias, the tendency to try to give answers that reflect well upon them, is called social desirability. Up to now, do you understand what it means?
Yeah, and there are different types of bias.
Okay.
And for experiments.
Okay, and then experiment typically involves at least one experimental group and a control group. So experimental group is the one that gets the treatment of operationalized in the independent variable. But the control group gets none of the independent variable. It serves as a basis for comparison. So, without a control group, knowing whether changes in the experimental group are due to the experimental treatment or simply to any treatment at all is impossible. In fact, merely selecting a group of people on whom to experiment has been determined to affect the performance of that group. Regardless of what is done to those individuals. This finding is known as Hawthorne effect. So on the right side, there are two tips. So on the up side, tip 1 is equivalent. It says equivalent environment control per situation relevant confounding variable. Do you understand? And second tip, it says double blinds eliminates both experimental and subject bias. Do you understand? Okay, good. And nextly, okay, let's continuing with the television example. The experimental group would be the participant who view violent television, while the control group would view some other type of television, perhaps a comedy. If I were really designing an experiment, I would have to be much more specific in operationally defining my independent variable. I would need to identify exactly what program each group would watch and for how long. Many experiments involve much more complicated design. So in our example, additional groups would view other types of film, or groups would view differing amounts of violent content. And one important method of control is known as the placebo method. And previously, I just referred their Hawthorne effect, and nowadays we refer a placebo method. And whenever participants in the experimental group are supposed to ingest the drug, participants in the control group are given an inert but otherwise identical substance. So this technique allows researchers to separate the physiological effect of the drug from the psychological effect of people thinking they took a drug. So it's called the placebo effect. So do you understand what it means? Placebo.
Yeah, like psychology and like physiology is different effects.
Okay, good. And sometimes using participants as their own control group is possible. A procedure known as counterbalancing. Counterbalancing, for example, if I wanted to see how frustration affected performance on an IQ test, I could have my participant engage in a task unlikely to cause frustration. Task they are IQ, and then given them a frustration task and test their IQs again. However, this procedure creates the possibility of other effects. participants may do better on the second IQ test simply by virtue of having taken the first IQ test. Yeah. This problem can be eliminated by using counterbalancing. So I can counterbalance by having half the participants to the frustrating task first and half the participants to the not frustrating task first and then switching. Yeah.
You switch.
And switching. And the right side, there is a gray box. Okay, let's look at the gray box. There is it says, students sometimes believe that a control group is the only possible method of control. But remember that although it is an extremely important and obviously named type of control, using control group is but one of many such methods. So later we can learn more about the control group. And then next lesson, we will learn about correlation method. So today we will learn about the experimental method. So there are some big methodology like field experiment and then like a laboratory experiment and controlled environment and some like assignment and what else? Variable and experimental bias and double-blind procedure and double-blind and single-blind and also one experimental group and a control group and Hudson effect, a placebo method, and finally counterbalancing and other effects. So you might know the meaning of these methodology now.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, do you have any question about today's lesson?
No, none so far. Actually, the experimental method you said, like, I saw a documentary on Netflix and they were conducting experiments, so I can relate what you just discussed earlier to this documentary. So it was well explained.
Okay, thank you. Very good. So tomorrow, as I said before, we'll learn about more correlational methods. So let's learn about more, okay?
Okay.
So let's call it a day and see you tomorrow.
What time are we going to start the class tomorrow? Is it morning?
Yeah, morning time, 9
Okay.
a.m., okay?
Okay, same time. Okay.
See you
Thank you so
tomorrow.
much. Yeah, see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a good
Bye.
night. See you.